right. Sensationalism in the media, right? We got to blame stuff on one particular thing. Oh, the reason the women think that they can fight toe to toe with a man is because of TV. The reason the women think that they can fight toe to toe with a man is because women aren't being slapped enough. Lots of people got opinions. Some of them I can agree with to some degree, but that ain't the only issue. It took a long time for people who had equal rights. Matter of fact, not just equal rights, they had special rights in addition to those equal rights. This includes minorities and women. Much of the complaint has been that these rights are not being observed, and every 10 years we have another set of laws that are exactly like the ones we passed 10 years ago, going all the way back to the 1950s. It doesn't matter how many times you pass the same law when there's no teeth to it. When the LGBT community became a hate group, and it did, when it was no longer about equality, it was about special rights and special privileges. Privileges. I want you to understand that having a gender surgery is a privilege. You have the privilege of being able to do that. You have the privilege of people fighting so hard for you to be able to be allowed to have a gender change on your insurance. Now, if only they would fight that hard for children who need life saving surgeries for cancer. And, well, there's many other things that a child can get and an adult can get too. Priorities. When our priorities started shifting away from what we need and started shifting to sensationalized news stories. We have to hear about some crazy person doing something crazy and suing somebody over something stupid. We get to hear this stuff all the time, and you hear it and you're going, that just doesn't add up. How is that possible in the United States, and why isn't somebody closing up those loopholes? It is unfortunate that we have to have women to do that for us. That's really how it is. We got to the point where we were pushing so hard for women's rights, women's rights, women's rights. We went well past that. We've gotten to the point now where a man can literally go to prison, and this has happened. A man can literally go to prison for saying hello to a woman. Now, if I was to show you how shamelessly many women have recorded themselves being when they find an attractive man, if a man acted like that towards an attractive woman, he'd be in jail, at least. He'd be getting a stern talking to by anybody around going, dude, you just started flapping your arms and going, I'm a god, I'm a god, I'm a god. Well, that might be flattering for a second, but when you just are so flustered and you got to post up for the whole world to see, and then you're literally doing things as a woman that if a man did them and that was posted up on the internet, that man would definitely have legal consequences. And if not legal consequences, probably physical consequences. And that just sucks. How is it that we are allowing women to behave in a way that we would not allow a man to behave? And then we have to pull out the most obscure stories. Like when it comes to the LGBT community, yes, when became a situation where I was allowed to defend my LGBT friends, regardless of their orientation. I was allowed to protect them. I was allowed to stand in the way instead of being told, well, you're not allowed to do that. And the thing is that for my entire life, it has been a hate crime to go after a homosexual. You might want to look back at how long ago those laws were actually created. Whether or not they were followed is arbitrary. Then there's the homeless situation, where we didn't have anti homeless laws. We didn't have any anti homeless laws. None prior to the Civil War. We had some sort of vagrancy. What do they call those? When it's not a law, but it's local ordinance. We had some local ordinances in some places about vagrancy, or there's another word starts vagabond. And those have very specific meanings, and meanings for us today aren't necessarily the same as they used to be. Now, BLM very, very heavily became a hate group, much like the LGBT community. It very much became a look at me, I'm a Pomeranian, look at me situation. And any of you who have ever owned a Pomeranian, you know that they're the most attention craving animals on the planet. And they try to put on their cute little puppy dog eyes, and they're naughty. Most of them are good. Every dog's going to have a different personality, but the fact is, it's an attention thing. Look at me, look at me. Now we get hijacked as disabled people from women's groups who want to ignore the fact that there are males being victimized too. That many of these groups, instead of disabilities being observed, we're only observing the disabilities of women when it comes to those rights. When it comes to actually paying attention to statistics of being victimized as a disabled person, especially as somebody who's autistic, you guys don't want to hear any of that. No. We're going to get it hijacked in every autism group as well. We get hijacked. Our story isn't going to get heard because we have a bunch of women who want to tell us how they have it worse than all of us. It's kind of like when a homosexual who's never been beaten up for being a homosexual because people in his life have protected him his entire life. He had a family that was accepting of him being a homosexual. He had friends that went places with him. He wasn't going to get attacked. And he also, when he was in an area where it probably was not a good idea to be vocal about being a homosexual, he minded his P's and Q's. You know, there are a great many people like that. But then those people's opinions, you know, when they want to believe that, you know, a lot of homosexuals are making this up because this one particular homosexual has never had to deal with it. Or when they want to believe that you, as a heterosexual in their mind because you're not gay, that you couldn't possibly have ever been assaulted because somebody wanted to project onto you that you were gay. You know, I don't have to be gay. I've got plenty of recordings of people calling me all sorts of derogatory names, and those very same people assaulting me. Everything from calling me the N-word or N-word lover to the F word, which is apparently derogatory for a homosexual, to, well, you name it. I fight for victims' rights, and I also have to, in order to do that, understand who is the most likely to be victimized, what those chances are. Now we get into the situation with Charlie Kirk and a bunch of ignorant people. Charlie Kirk was very good at arguing with morons. You know, he pulled every stop and every trick. What he was good at is something that there's a comedian keeps popping up. He's apparently born in Ireland, sounds very British, and he wears a three-piece suit. and he basically tears down hecklers. It's because he's quick-witted. A lot of people are. Charlie Kirk was quick-witted, but in a different way. See, he had a racist agenda and a hateful agenda, and he was able to mask that by making false allegations and accusations, but he would state them as if they're a fact. When somebody asked a question that he didn't like, or somebody from a group that he didn't like, he would cut them off sternly and quickly and try to change the subject, or just start insulting the person, talking down to them and berating them like they're a dog. A lot of people told me when this crap happened right after Charlie Kirk was killed, and they're like, he wasn't a racist. Yes, he was. Absolutely, he was. See, that's one of the things that we got to point out a long time ago. You don't have to call somebody a hateful name for it to be a hate crime. We established back in the 90s when we discovered that there were officers who, over 90% of the people that they were arresting, pulling over, and ticketing were black, despite the fact that black people in those vicinities were less than 4% of the population. That did result in people going, you know what, that's definitely profiling. Profiling is wrong. I can agree with that. It's wrong to go deciding that we should kick somebody out of the country because they have an accent, or their name sounds foreign, or their skin is brown. In Nebraska, brown skinned folks are called Mexicans. Doesn't matter where you're from. You could be from Argentina, you could be from Puerto Rico, which is a United States holding. They don't care, you're a Mexican to them. That's the way that it's viewed. That is racism. That's not nationalism. You know, these people aren't actually Mexican. They're just being assigned as Mexicans. They're being, well, in Nebraska, you get to hear quite frequently, sorry, there's some stuff going on in the background. My computer doesn't pick it up well, so you probably won't be able to hear it, which I'm fine with. So there was a liberal girl, college girl, uneducated. Now you might want to say that college educates you, but no, when you send an idiot to college, you get an educated idiot. She also wasn't finished with her college. And she asked a question, and Charlie Kirk did something that she wasn't prepared for. If she'd have paid attention, she might have been prepared for it. Charlie Kirk isn't going to fight fair. He's going to use his podium to down on you and make you feel like you're a nobody. He's going to use his voice to do so. He's going to use his tone to do so. And if you're a meek little mouse who's going to fold up in the corner, he's going to take full advantage of that. So she was talking about sexual assault. And he wanted to ask the question of what's a feminist. He also wanted to ask the question of, there was one other question he asked her in lieu of answering the question that she had asked. And then he wanted to ask her questions instead, and she tried to pull the same tactic back. She said, well, what's a woman? He'd asked her, what's a woman? And of course, she's just flustered. That's it. Her words aren't coming together. She was asking a question, expecting an answer, and instead what she got is an attitude. And then, you know, people cheered him on. They thought Charlie Kirk was doing the greatest thing because he talked down to somebody who had no business being there. Was not prepared for what she had ahead of her, for what was right in front of her. But that was the same way with a lot of people. Charlie Kirk was very much that way. Now, it happened that that particular woman was a white woman, but she was a white woman who was asking a question he didn't want to answer. And she fell for it completely. The crowd fell for it completely. All the people there completely fell for it. All of them. Now, when Charlie Kirk was killed, you guys want to talk about influencers. What are they influencing you to do? Why do you call them influencers? Because people believe their opinions? Because people will believe what they say? Yeah, some of those people are gonna hear that stuff. They're gonna realize that you've been lying to them the whole time. They're not gonna be happy about it. When they realize that people believing your lies is resulting in innocent people being harmed and or killed, and their plights being ignored, yeah, you want to do something about that, especially if it's one of your loved ones that was killed. See, ideas are very, very dangerous. I'll give you one example. As many of you from the UK are well aware, slavery in the UK was made illegal in the year 1066. That was a long, long time ago. Now, here in the United States, slavery lasted for a very, very long time. And that's over a book. And I happen to have a copy of that book. Well, if I can find that book. So there's a part, well, several parts in the Bible that tell you how you're supposed to treat your slave. See, they wanted to use Christianity to basically make a lot of decisions for people. Forced Christianity, forced religion. This country still has forced Christianity. Christian propaganda is the largest brand of propaganda in the United States. We have so many people, like, for example, Donald Trump wants to pretend he believes in God. Well, lots of old people want to start believing in God. It's not because they actually believe, it's because they're afraid of going to hell. They get old, they realize what horrible things they've done in their lives and how they just didn't care, and they start thinking about hell. Well, what if there is a hell? We get to see how some of the most immoral people, such as the Bollinger family, did horrible things to their own family members. Made excuses why poor them, they were drug addicts. Poor them, they were the victims when they beat their children, beat their wives, molested their own kids while drunk, kept dangerous men around. And then they say, oh no, I'm a Christian, I'm a Christian, I'm a Christian. You can't judge me, I'm a Christian. I grew up with Christians. And I could not say that I had grown up if I remained Christian, if I remained believing all of that crap. How they get to use their religion for narcissism, to excuse so much cruelty. And you got to go to the book of Romans for a lot of that. Throughout the Bible, it's got story after story after story of people standing up to persecution, standing up to tyranny, standing up to many government bodies that did not represent them. And then, of course, we've got the books that were written much, much later. The books that want to tell you that God put the people in power that are in power, so you should follow them anyway. Whew. That's a bad message. And we've got so many people that want to force Christian values. What values? What values? I get to hear about them. I'm not seeing them. Honesty. I get to hear about honesty out of Christians. I don't get to see it. I don't get to hear it. I get to hear about forgiveness from these Christians, but in reality, I see vengeance and hatred and the spoils of war. We should do these horrible things in God's name. It's kind of like during the Crusades, both sides saying God wills it as their excuse and justification for the slaughter of other people. Then there's the fact that Christians have killed more Christians than all other religions combined. Yeah, as a Christian, you are not likely to be killed by a Muslim. You are more likely to be killed by another Christian. As a Christian nation, you are less likely to be invaded by a Muslim nation than another Christian nation. In the Bible, it's got rules for how you're supposed to treat your slave. And in the South, even though the Declaration of Independence, and this is written by many of the people who signed it, was intended to allow slaves to go free within a decade of us becoming a country, 2 decades at most. But then Southerners, when offered time and time again the modernization that was coming in the North, modernization that was coming about because it was illegal to own slaves in the North, modernization that, well, made the South easy to roll over. So even though in the South less than 1% of the population owned slaves, when they seceded from the Union, well, basically everybody was drafted. If you were a male, you were in the military. Now, I get to see how people use slavery back in the day, specifically American slavery with specifically black slaves. We want to ignore all other slavery types from all other nations and all other colors. It's specifically only American black slaves that we're focused on. And even that, we go out of our way as Americans to ignore the actual facts of the situations. So, here in the United States, there was one right that the South was fighting for. Sure, democracy and all that, but if the side that you want to win doesn't win, well, you just leave, right? For example, when those Southerners decided that if we lose the election and Lincoln wins, well, then we're just going to leave. Well, unfortunately for them, Southern voters as well had voted for the end of slavery and for Abraham Lincoln to become president. Now, after the war, they couldn't have the Jim Crow laws as you believe them to be. What they had to do is that they had to target black people, and mind you, there was around 4 million black people in the South that were made homeless immediately. This is where our anti-homeless laws came about. How every aspect of being homeless is illegal. Every aspect of it. During the 1920s, we had a slight moratorium. In the 1930s, we had a slight moratorium. But for the most part, those anti-homeless laws have pretty well stayed fast. But then, of course, there's the propaganda. You know, much the same as we're getting to hear this propaganda that Mexicans are rapists. Well, that's obviously not a fact. There may be people from other countries, and even this one, who have committed those acts, but that does not make every person from that country guilty. It doesn't make it okay to target and blanket an entire group. But America has allowed this. Since the Civil War, Americans of every color and every gender, regardless of how many genders you want to argue that there are or are not, we all have now this scapegoat that we can take our stuff out on and they can't defend themselves. And we made it worse by dumping off a whole bunch of severely mentally fucked up people onto the streets in the 1980s. And then you want to pretend that everybody on the streets is mentally fucked up like that because you see a schizophrenic, delusional guy marching around in circles on a street corner, beating his chest, beating a drum, and crapping himself. So all of a sudden, this is the guy that you have associated with homelessness. This is the guy that you're telling your friends stories about. You're not realizing that there's also the people who are about to lose their place. You who have trashed on homeless people, you have the possibility that your boyfriend or husband, when you realize that he's molesting your daughter and he's not going to pay his part of the bills anymore, your family isn't going to be able to help you out in any way, shape, or form because whatever reason they happen to have, you're on your own. You can't pay rent. You and your kids are homeless. And now, what? Are you there because you were a drug addict? Are you homeless because you were molesting kids? Are you homeless because you couldn't take no for an answer? No, you're homeless because you were victimized. You couldn't pay your bills on your wages and you got evicted. And then you get told it's your fault for getting a place you couldn't afford. Well, you could afford it with the person you were with, the person you put your trust in. Now, it has to be a female victim for you guys to care, which is why I bring this up. If I bring up women being victimized, you guys will care. It's kind of like how disgusting MMIP and MMIW are. Are these hate groups? No, they're actually the opposite. The problem here is not with those groups themselves, but with your perception. It used to be MMIP, and for those of you who don't know, that's missing and murdered indigenous people. But nobody cared. They just, for the most part, saw them as brown people. They're probably all alcoholics and drug addicts anyway. Who fucking cares? And that's the general perception by the public. No matter how much you want to argue that you're not like that, chances are pretty good you are exactly like that, and you're just in complete and total denial. It's unfortunate that you're aware of it because you are aware of it. You just want to tell yourself that you're not. You don't want the judgment that comes with it. Recently, I told a man that I have friends of many different colors that are racists, and he said that he doesn't have any friends that are racist. He's not going to have friends that are racist, and I don't see how that's possible unless you have no friends. See, while I am against racism, and I don't tolerate racism, I will be friends with racists. I've had black friends that are racist. And you go, well, if he's racist, why is he friends with you? I guess you'd have to ask those individuals themselves. That'd probably be the question to ask them, reasonably. When you ask me for other people's motives, I can speculate. For some of these people, I can show you what they claim to be their motives. I can also show you, in many of these cases, how their motives kept on changing and adapting to whatever suited their needs. When white people were being shot for saying all lives matter, as if it was claiming that black lives didn't matter. Once BLM became a racist hate group, that's where that all lives matter thing came from. What about the victims that aren't black? We were told all growing up, hey, you fight for the LGBT community, you're fighting for equality, only later to be victimized by by people from the LGBT community that had legal armor, legal protection. It's now legal for homosexuals to victimize people. It's now legal for women to victimize people. It is now legal for transvestites to, sorry if I don't have any teeth and I don't pronounce these words properly. However, we are allowed to be victimized by these people, and we're supposed to be grateful for the enlightenment. Very unreasonable people with unreasonable expectations. When I was in Boulder, I was fine with the them they thing. If you prefer him her or them they, fine. I can go along with that. I think it's absurd to some degree, only from a descriptive point of view. I'll give you an example. If a dude in a dress wants to be identified as a woman, I have no problems with identifying that dude in a dress as a woman. However, if that dude in a dress commits a crime, I'm telling the cops exactly what description fits the situation. I'm not going to say a woman named Ariana did it. I'm going to say there's a dude in a dress that calls himself Ariana, because that's reality. When I give a description, and it just so happens that on that occasion, the person happens to be black that I'm describing, I have to try to figure out and fumble through some word to describe them to make it insanely confusing because somebody's offended by the word black. Or because they might pretend that I'm racially profiling because I said the word black. Not happening. That's absurd. Now, where I had the severe issue with the T part of the LGBT community, we're not talking about cross-dressers here. We're talking about people who want a full transition. One of these folks wanted to give me some big, long title as their him, her, or them, they. And not only give me that big, long thing, but was angry that I didn't read their minds that they wanted this insanely long title as their them, they. I was getting yelled at right outside of the Starbucks. I mean, I'm going, I held a door open for somebody. What the fuck did I just do? And I'm literally just holding a door open for somebody. Where is all of this stuff coming from? It's not like I held the door open only for women or only for men. It's not like I had chosen for somebody that I had opened the door for to be something other than identifying as a man or a woman. But here I am getting this big, super long title that I'm sorry. At that point, I decided that I was going to be just as crazy back. If you're going to expect me to know that super long title with something, 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 sparkling unicorn galaxy, or whatever it is that this insane title was, well, I'm going to insist that you call me Super Shortsy 5000, International Superstar and Badass Battle Dragon, Linguistic Mastermind and Ad Liberator of Comedic Verse. And as soon as I get some property, you can add Esquire onto the end of it. Oh, now it's absurd? Now that's what it finally takes for you to understand how absurd that really is? No, we're going to stay here until you get it right, or you're going to stop it insisting stupid shit. That's the end of it. I shouldn't have to show by example how what you are doing is wrong, how what you are doing is biased. MMIP, that's missing and murdered Indigenous people. They shouldn't have had to start a whole new group and call it missing and murdered Indigenous women. They shouldn't have had to, but they did. The reason for this is because as soon as they changed that last letter the P, from person to women. All of a sudden, all of our training as guys from the day that we're born kicked in. We're supposed to care. These are women. These aren't just brown people who are alcoholics and drug addicts in our delusional minds anymore. These are the people we're supposed to protect. So now we have actual attention for missing and murdered Indigenous women. And that's horrible because those Indigenous people are having to forget their brothers, their fathers, their uncles, their sons, in the hope that you'll care at least about the women. So that bias prevents Native men from being found, being searched for. All across the nation, we've got stuff like that. Most of it much more biased for a much more sinister reason. When you've got a politician whose wife is nagging him, what are the chances that he's going to try to stay with his wife because getting a divorce is going to look bad? And number two, that he's going to do what she wants because a big messy divorce will definitely look bad. I want you to raise your hand if you're dumb enough to think that President Clinton was actually running that office. Hillary Clinton already had 2 terms as president. Now we get hate groups, and they are hate groups. Once it became a situation where we're being lied to by these groups in order to get their support, and yet they're victimizing us, the very people supporting them. It's white people, white people, white people, white people, slavery, slavery, slavery. Over 100 years ago, women didn't have the right to vote. Yeah, I knew that. Yeah, I knew there were slaves in the United States that were black. I was also aware there were slaves that were other colors. I'm also aware that the Bible gives instructions on how you're supposed to treat your slaves, and that the South used that as an excuse to keep slavery long after they had agreed that they were going to end it. That's what led to the Civil War. It wasn't states' rights. It was only one right, and that was the right to own or possess another human being. Now, if it's in the Bible, it must be okay, right? If it's in the Bible, well, slavery must be okay. It's in the Bible, right? No. Also, what Bible are you reading? You and I have very different Bibles. I do have a Bible here. I do read the Bible. Matter of fact, I'm going to pull it out because a lot of y'all want to use the Bible as your excuse for such horrible things in the very same way as those supposedly Christian Southerners wanted to use the Bible. Is this it? It is. All right. Now, although I see this as a fiction book, that means fantasy. This one right here has the these, thys, those, and nows that y'all hate so much. But my Bible has something in it that your New International Version does not. We'll go to Numbers 23, verse 22. God brought them out of Egypt. He hath, as it were, the strength of an unicorn. All right, chapter 24. Numbers chapter 4, verse 8. God brought him forth out of Egypt. He hath, as it were, the strength of an unicorn. So let's go forward just a little bit more. Right here we've got Deuteronomy. Yeah, there's lots of jokes about that. So let me see, where were we at? His glory is like let's see, Deuteronomy chapter 33, verse 17. His glory is like the firstling of his bullock, and his horns are like the horns of unicorns. Why is my Bible better than yours? My Bible got unicorns. And yes, I could use this book to try to excuse any number of sins. I've seen people do it my entire life. I live in a Christian nation. Many of the people that I know that did terrible things wanted to use, I'm a Christian now, as their excuses for why it is justified or should be forgiven. They don't seem to have forgiveness for others for their perceived discrepancies, indiscretions, or sins. Only you can judge me because you're a Christian, but you say only God can judge me, right? No, you don't. It's not that way. You want to claim that only God can judge you, but it's okay for you to judge me. And you'll go through the scriptures and you'll try to find stuff to pass judgment on me, no matter how silly or absurd it is. Let me show you silly and absurd. All right, I'm telling you something that obviously is not true. I am not better than you because of my Bible. I'm not a better person than you just because my Bible has the word unicorn in it. Job, chapter 39, verse 9. Will the unicorn be willing to serve thee or abide by thy crib? Job, chapter 39, verse 10. Canst thou bind the unicorn with his band in the furrow? Well, I got an itchy mustache. Yep, and these things are for surely in here. How about Psalms chapter 22, verse 21? Save me from the lion's mouth, for thou hast heard me from the horns of the unicorns. All right, let's go to the next one. Psalms 29, verse 6. He maketh them also to skip like a calf, Lebanon and sirloin like a young unicorn. Yep. So, because I can go in the Bible and pull out the word unicorn in my Bible and you can't pull it out of yours, does that make me superior to you? Because I have this book, is it okay for me to ignore indiscretions against you, victimization against you, harm against you? Is it okay for me to say, oh, well, I think slavery is okay because the Bible has instructions for it? There were people like, for example, Polly Olson. She wanted to use religion as her excuse to do nothing. And she was telling me, because, I was trying to explain the situation to her, and she says to me, Sean, everyone's going to die. All right, I'm going to die. You're going to die. Everybody's going to die. And then proceeded to tell me about how she's friends with the Dual County Sheriff's deputies and how it's a situation where she doesn't feel comfortable coming forward with the truth because she's friends with them. And of course, I made a video about that situation. Not just her. She wasn't the only person taking part in it. There's also a Pastor Rod Wright, who's not actually a pastor, who was involved in the situation. And Deputy Holloway was involved in the situation. And Robert Franklin Mornick was involved in the situation. And Leslie Snell. There was a lot of people involved in the situation. A lot of people who knew what was going on. A lot of people who knew the situation with Natalie Bollinger was very real. Many of them saw it on the news as these things were happening. And yet these people still wanted to pretend that I was talking about unicorns. Wanted to pretend that the threats, harassment, and assaults over the Natalie Bollinger situation were delusions. Wanted to pretend that Nobody would ever do that to somebody after being slandered on the news in such a way. And then wanted to, in court, insinuate through lies and also through lies of omission that Natalie Bollinger herself was a delusion, that she did not exist, that I had manufactured her in my own mind, that I had manufactured the assaults in my own mind. Yeah, Scott DaCosta, a sheriff I was trying to turn in. Well, I had to try to turn him into himself, and I had to try to turn in other crimes to him. Was forced to. And I've got recording after recording of how I was treated. Despite the fact that I still stand up for the rights of black folks, still stand up for the rights of women, I also stand up for the rights of white people who were victimized because of their color, of men who are victimized because of their gender. How there is no such thing as justice for a homeless man, especially if he's disabled. You will exploit the hell out of his disabilities. You will exploit the hell out of his disability money, and then you will go running around telling people he's mentally ill. God bless America, right? Let's get back to my unicorns because, of course, this is what you guys want. You guys want to pretend that I'm blaming all of this on unicorns. Well, fine. We'll blame it on the unicorns in my Bible that is superior, blah, 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 blah. Because you don't believe the way that I believe, and because your Bible says something different than my Bible, you must be wrong, and therefore you're going to burn in a lake of whatever it is that it says in your book. I think in my book it says a lake of fire, but I could be wrong about that. Right now we're focused on blaming unicorns, for Christ's sake. Is it unicorns? No. Am I literally, legitimately blaming unicorns? No, that's the opposite of what I'm doing here. I'm showing you how fucking absurd this is. That you can make the point that it doesn't really matter if you follow the law because we're all going to die anyway. And you say, Sean, you're going to die. Well, I know I'm going to die. But when I speak up and say those exact same words, that's wanting to be used as a threat against people's lives? No, absolutely not. That whole video that I made after those abusive situations by Polly Olson, Sean Holloway, Leslie Snell, Scott DaCosta, and William Barr, all of these people wanted to use religion as their excuse to ignore the law. Separation of church and state, my ass. Meanwhile, these aren't real Christians. These are people digging for excuses. If their excuse doesn't lie with the law, then they'll dig through the Bible for an excuse. There are plenty. If they don't have an excuse in the Bible, then they'll reach for an excuse with the law. Psalms 92, verse 10. But my horn shalt thou exalt like the horn of an unicorn. I shall be anointed with fresh oil. And how about this one? Here's Isaiah 34, verse 7. And the unicorn shall come down with them, and the bullocks with the bulls, and their land shall be soaked with blood, and their dust made fat with fatness. Now, because I read that from the Bible, what are the chances that someone's going to try to pretend that either A, I'm some delusional schizo lunatic who is threatening to harm people in the name of Jesus, or that they're going to try to pretend that because the words blood and soaked are in there, that it must be a threat. There are supposed to be laws that protect people like me from exactly this type of abuse. I've lived too long to believe Christians are good people. I know better. I know that Jesus is used as an excuse to harm others and to avoid persecution. You commit a crime, well, your preacher might even help you to get away with committing a felony because you're a Christian who wants forgiveness. Well, he's a mandatory reporter as well. So if he does that, he's breaking the law. Sure, you can have your forgiveness, but according to the Bible, you got to ask for it. Who are you asking for it? Has Alicia Bollinger ever asked me for forgiveness for what she's done? No, she's busy making excuses. How about Rose M. Kelly? Is she asking for forgiveness for what she's done? No, she's busy making excuses. Busy playing victim. Busy calling her victim mentally ill. Now, my question is, how many times is someone allowed to hit you before you're allowed to hit them back? How many times is someone allowed to threaten to kill you and your friends and family before you're allowed to threaten them back? There are individuals within the LGBT community that I am still friends with. There are individuals within the BLM community that I am still friends with. We don't always agree. But those individuals are not that hate group. It is unfortunate that they put their lot in with such people. Much as it is unfortunate that so many people who claim to be my friends, claim to love me, claim they would come forward and claim they would tell the truth, cast their lot in with the very same group of people who wanted to get a hold of me and tell me they wanted to cut my throat, cut my balls off, call me a Satanist, and of course work together with their friends and coworkers to harass me as a group and to play victim, to have their husbands, boyfriends, people like that reach out to me and threaten to harm me because I spoke up about supposed Christians who wanted to assume my guilt, assume that I had killed Natalie Bollinger, assume that I had raped Natalie Bollinger when she was a child, and her sister. And yet, there's not one piece of evidence, not even one, from Natalie or Alicia showing that either one of them ever accused me of doing any such thing. But it's okay. I'm not black, so BLM doesn't care. I'm a male, so despite the fact that I'm autistic, the fact is that I'm an autistic female. You guys see me as white. Well, these KKK assholes see me as a Jew. At least your roles are clearly defined. Whereas no matter what, it's my fault. It's my fault for being white because some white people a long time ago, before I was ever born, owned some other human beings. Well, my ancestors were owned by people too. You're not likely to find a person who did not have ancestors that were both slaves and slave owners. And no, it's not okay to force that on me. Charlie Kirk didn't know how to argue. Didn't know how to make a respectable point. He knew how to shut people down, how to shut people out, how to change the subject, how to change the topic, how to try to turn it around on unsuspecting morons who went in unprepared. I finally have somebody who's sober, hopefully, to help me out a little bit with this. Um, I don't think that she's going to help me how I need, but I'm trying and hoping. We get to speak to an attorney on Friday, and hopefully that might help to get the process started of protecting me from local law enforcement and the local community over slander on the internet, slander these people watched on the internet and spread to their friends and think it's okay to harm me as a result of. People like Andrew Wolness, people like Scott Allen Brown, people like Mawson Vijan. Absolutely, I speak out. I've also got video after video showing that while I get treated like I'm schizophrenic and delusional, the assaults are very real. The threats against my life, my sister's life, and my niece's life are very real. The people harming us in person are very real. And that the obstruction of justice that has left all of this evidence out of court required errors, administrative errors, clerical errors, and just outright laziness on every level. Every level of the criminal justice system had to go out of their way to pretend. All of these places knew that Natalie Bollinger was not a delusion, and yet they insisted on trying to push to the mental health community that it was a delusion. Continued to try to commit acts to prevent me from having access to the evidence to show a mental health professional. To do everything that they could to try to convince mental health professionals that I was schizophrenic and delusional, and try to convince mental health professionals not to look as a result. Well, now I've got a whole bunch of mental health evaluations that show very clearly that those people stated that I am not schizophrenic, that I am not delusional, that these places did make a mistake, many of them, and that Natalie Bollinger is very real, and that there is evidence of me being assaulted, of the abuse that I have to endure. Yeah, my psychologists were able to find that on the internet as part of their psychological evaluation, when apparently the police in this town, just like the police in Chapel, Nebraska and the police in Colorado, apparently are incapable of finding that stuff, looking it up, locating it, or anything close to that, even with help. And yet these psychologists with the State Forensics Board were able to find it in a cursory search. That means basically a quick search. And even with that, now I have to deal with the fact that the courts are trying to keep the paperwork of their own evaluators out of court and out of my medical papers, out of the papers at TFCC and at CARE. Anything that does not fit the narrative of delusional, they're still fighting hard to keep out. Each of these agencies that I was sent to, after telling them repeatedly that I'm trying to turn them in and how inappropriate it is that I'm being sent back to them, well, later on, they want to use that as their excuse why they never did their job to begin with, why they're refusing to do their jobs now, despite the fact that, well, if I get sent to you as a service, let's say, for example, the police tell me that I need to go to TFCC, and I go to TFCC and they're refusing to do that, Well, TFCC has to tell the police that they're refusing to do that, because if I tell the police that they're refusing to do that, they'll argue with me about what TFCC is supposed to be doing. They'll tell me TFCC is supposed to be doing a bunch of stuff that TFCC already told me they're not supposed to do, they're not allowed to do, and so on and so forth. A lot of people out here are schizophrenic or delusional or on drugs or a combination of them. That doesn't make it okay to just assume or project those things onto an innocent person. It's weird if I turn my head like this, stick my head up like that, the way that my screen is, it makes my eyeball look like it raises up about half an inch. It's kind of gnarly looking. I don't know if it's like that on your screens. It might just be the way that my camera angle is set up. I don't know. What I do know is that I'm tired of being victimized just because I have a penis. My entire life, I've gotten to see women, vindictive women, terrorize and destroy innocent men's lives because they didn't get what they wanted right when they wanted it. And this is my entire life that I have seen this. While these very same women complain that they're victims, no, they are not. Let me tell you my worst sin of my entire life. I didn't really like my stepdad. His name is Michael Scott Wade. So when I was about 7, I lied. I claimed that he'd molested me when he had not. And I didn't tell a very convincing story. Now that was my worst sin ever. Now let me tell you about Michael Scott Wade. He and I did not get along after that. That does not mean that I'm not going to be honest about situations. My stepdad, Michael Scott Wade, ended up with domestic violence on his record. Now, the reason that he ended up with domestic violence on his record, this is a man who's military trained. He could have broken my mother in half on accident. He would have had no problems beating the living hell out of my mother at will if he had chosen to do so. But he didn't. So one day my mom cornered him in the bathroom and she wouldn't let him out, wouldn't let him leave, wouldn't let him get out of the bathroom, wouldn't get between him and wouldn't let him get to the door because she was in between it. So she was hitting him over and over and over again, and grabbed her by the shoulders and turned her around so that he could get to the door. Now, when he turned around and let her go, she went into the bathtub. Now, even if he had shoved her into the bathtub, I want you to know that despite the fact that this is my mother, I know my mother. I know how vindictive she is. I was there to help try to clean up the mess when she beat the hell out of my stepdad's truck. Why did she beat the hell out of it? Because although she thinks it's okay for her to go run around having sex with whoever she wants, and that's not considered cheating, and she'll try to tell Scott, who's an idiot, oh, it's because you were emotionally cheating on me. You were talking to a girl at work who's your coworker. You were emotionally cheating on me. Or when she destroyed the truck, this was because a character in a video game that he played got married to another character in the video game. One of these characters was a male, one of them was a female. However, the person who owned the other character was a male. And my mother knew this because she played the video game. So, of course, my mother threw a tantrum while coked out of her fucking gourd, kicked my stepdad out of the house, and ran around Chapel, Nebraska telling everybody that he was a homosexual. God, what a terrible person. He's emotionally cheating on her. He's a homosexual, and these are her justifications for cruelty, property damage, and physical assaults. Are you fucking kidding me? The difference between my mother and I is that when I do something fucked up, I admit it. What's the difference between me and the Christians that I know? I'll profess by mouth. I'll tell the truth instead of hiding it. See, while these predators want to do everything in their power to try to convince people not to look and not to listen to me, I'm not asking that out of you. I am asking you to listen to them. I want you to listen to them. If you believe what they tell you blindly, that's on you. There's two sides to the story. These places are selling you fiction, and I'm being harmed over it. And it's not okay to treat me like it's a delusion. It's not okay to force me to turn in my predators to themselves by name. It was never okay for cops to tell me that I needed to go talk to Natalie Bollinger to put a stop to this. That was never okay. And there were a lot of other not okay things that they did, like telling me that I needed to move to the Front Range of Colorado. That actually puts me in closer proximity to the people that I was aware where they lived. In Boulder, Colorado, where I was being victimized, that was my home. I knew a lot of the people that were victimizing me. By name with some of them. Of course, you guys think that if you bully somebody and make fun of their looks, make fun of their gender, blame the gender, blame the looks, you look like a rapist. You look like a rapist. You must be a rapist because you look like a rapist. And then it changes to, you're a rapist, you're a rapist. And then, of course, you want to get into the, oh, she looks like a child. She looks like a little kid. She looks like a little girl. Oh my God, you're a fucking pedophile. And are you hearing this irrational bullshit? You will believe blindly because a woman said so. And you will do everything in your power to prevent her victim from showing the truth of the situation. And then you tell him it's his fault. It's his fault that you assaulted him. It's his fault that you tried to destroy evidence. And they'll use something that's not even true as their excuse to do it. Oh, it's okay for me to do these things because you're a murderer. Well, I'm not a murderer. It's okay for us to do these things because you're a rapist, except that I'm not a rapist. It's okay for us to do these things to you because you're a child molester, except I'm not a child molester. Much like with Donald Trump wanting to project all this shit onto brown-skinned individuals, all of your groups project this shit onto the homeless, the disabled, and men.